Kia ora koto and welcome to Lunch on the Way. We're joined here with obviously myself, Joey Millington, Jonathan Hoskin, and Graham Flett. Um, Jonathan, what's it like being in this in-between space of submitting your PhD and then waiting for Judgment Day?
It's good, man. It's like a warm spa. I'm just, I'm soaking, mate. I'm just honestly, I've got like cold beer, my life could be if I could describe my life in an image, I'd be sitting in a spa just drinking a cold beer right now. But it's coming to the end, and I know I'm going to have to get out into that cold air. So, yeah, it's a little bit scary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
it's good.
man.
It's good, man.
How about
Yeah.
you, Graham? How's it been?
Oh yeah, no, I'm good. The treatment's ticking on. I'm on to my You'll notice my voice again. I've
It's
changed the
pretty
treatment.
sexy, mate.
Oh no, they've changed the treatment because
Oh, okay.
thanks, Jonathan. My wife doesn't think it's sexy. But anyway, the treatment is potentially damages the vocal cords, so they've had to change it.
Wow. Oh
So I've got
man.
the feeling in the fingers and in the vocal cords are they're a bit of a concern. So hopefully a couple of weeks it should come right.
Okay.
Mm. Well,
How are you, Joey? What's
well,
happening,
I've got
man?
all right. So with
You've been
this
lighting fires, Joey. Is
yeah,
that
yeah.
smoke?
So
That eastern part of Canada's gone up in smoke.
it is. Yeah. So for those
Yeah, thinking
listening,
of you, Canada.
we haven't done a few episodes because I've been in Canada. I made a quick trip over there for my grandfather's funeral. He lived to a good old age of 87. Great funeral. Yeah, yeah. I got some stories that I won't share here about that. But I have a story that I want to tell that I think might be a good catalyst from that. So, my family goes to a Pentecostal church now.
Oh,
All right.
yay!
So for the two Sundays that I went to church in Canada in Halifax, we went to the Pentecostal church. To give some context, my uncle is like been a Christian for about a year and a half, 2 years, recovery background. And so he's attended that church. They've really grabbed hold of him in like a really caring kind of way. And he now works at the church as like a property person because it's a large church. And so the pastor there has been like super, super helpful to my family. One, because someone on his staff's father passed away. But my grandfather, but the pastor seems like a super awesome, great guy, like a pastoral pastor kind of guy. So they go there now because, as you would expect, if someone cares for you on that level, why wouldn't you, right?
Mhm.
And so I go there on the first Sunday, and the vibe is like this. Think of like, um, not quite like as intense as like a Hillsong aesthetic, but pretty close. There's cameras and stuff and whatever, and they have a good live stream, and it's probably about 400 to 500 people in the place.
Wow.
It's actually a beautiful building, high ceiling, balcony, that kind of stuff. And it's an old church in the sense of it's been in the community for 50 years.
Right.
Um, and so I go that Sunday. That was great. It was wonderful. I know people who go to that church. I went to do my master's with somebody who's a pastor there. And then the next Sunday is Pentecost Sunday. And I go to a Pentecostal church on Pentecost Sunday. And this guy who I follow on Twitter, Ed Stetzer, he just tweeted out on that Sunday. He said, it's Pentecost Sunday, which means for Baptists, it's just another Sunday. And I said, and I tweeted him, I replied, tweeted him, and I said, I'm at a Pentecostal church on Pentecost Sunday, ... I wasn't ready. So, but this is not a critical story. It's actually, I think, a nice story where it's exactly what you would expect. Like it felt like this was like their Super Bowl Sunday type of service. If you understand that reference, where it's like, this is like the big one, right? Like we're called
Yeah.
Pentecostals. It's Pentecost Sunday. Let's go. Right. And so the service starts as you would expect, call to worship, music. And then like someone comes up after the worship time to like MC, host, greet. And that's usually quite like invitational around like praying for one another. There might be a moment of response even before the message. And there certainly was.
Wow.
And so I reconciled within myself. I said, you know what? I don't get prayed for that often. because I'm a pastor at a church, I usually pray for people. So I said to myself before the service even started, I'm going to go up to the front and receive prayer no matter what the response is. I don't care, because I just would like to get prayed for. I don't have a particular need. I just want to. And
how many people were down the front? How many people were coming down?
Like 10, 15, and there's probably like 7 or 8 pastors or leaders lined up at the front. So you basically go to a person.
Yep.
And so I went up to my friend, who I knew, and he prayed for me. And it was a wonderful, very enthusiastic, like charismatic type prayer, a little bit of prophetic stuff in there. And that was good, and I didn't like feel particularly different, like nothing had changed, but I was fully like ready for breakthrough, if I can use that phrase, right? I'm like, it's Pentecost Sunday at a Pentecostal church. Here we go. So I sit back down next to my mom, and the sermon starts, and it's kind of what you would expect on Pentecost Sunday, Pentecostal church. It's about speaking in tongues, and the application at the end is to encourage everybody to begin to speak in tongues. And I thought the methodology, to be honest, if I'm being completely honest, I was like, I had questions with the methodology. I don't mind people speaking in tongues. I got friends who do. It's not a thing that I really care about. It's not my experience as a Christian. But I was, I don't care. I just thought the methodology was a bit funny. So I had a critical hat on, right, during this time. And I'm like looking around, and I'm looking at my mom, and we're both kind of like, yeah, this is a bit weird. But we'll just take it in, because you know what? This church is still amazing, even though there's some funny stuff that's going on. And while I'm thinking that, I'm standing there, and I start to get like this feeling in my chest that just like, that where it's like full, but it's not like full because of air or lungs or because of anything else. It's just like, it's full. And I'm just like, I begin to get like lightheaded, and my legs begin to get weak. And I'm like, what the heck is going on right now? And it was actually like a really nice feeling. It was like, I've had feelings like this before. But it had been a while, and I had to sit down, because I was just like, "Oof, this is a bit too much for me to stand in this moment." Everyone's like, it's quite the climax of the service, right? And I was not caught up in the moment. I'm like, I'm kind of actually standing away from the moment, because I'm being a bit too critical in my head. And so I sit down, and after reflecting on that, I'm like, I feel like if I would have just opened my mouth, who knows? Maybe I would have spoken in tongues. I don't know. Like it was that kind of thing. And I thought it was funny how, even though I was like critical, open, but critical, that like I would attribute it to like God transcending my critical posture, and kind of being like, hey, something is happening here in the room and in this space, and it can happen in you as well, despite what your disposition might be. And that was kind of my takeaway from it. And it was kind of an answer to prayer, because I've been like, I was praying into this trip into Canada, to be like, I would like to have like a bit of a spiritual reset, if you will. If you could do that for me, God. And then I forgot about it. And then, the last Sunday I'm there, I feel like he kind of does, but he does it in a way I didn't expect.
Yeah.
So that's really all I got to share about that. It was just funny. It was an interesting experience. I know, because we talk a lot about like Pentecostals, Anglicans, Wesleyans, and how we all do different things, and we can be critical of this, there, and that. But then like, they're still like, well, God shows up, or if like the preachers like to say, but God,
Right.
but God does what he wants to do, Anyway, what are your thoughts?
Despite all our sort of, how do you call it, methodologies or ways of doing things, God still turns up. I guess that's in the story. I mean, there is something about putting on the critical hat here, because I've been in similar ones, and probably I think it's just my personality and maybe my family culture. There tends to be a little bit of resistance when the crowd's going one way, and You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's sort of
I'm the
like,
same
oh,
way. I feel
I'm
the
not
same
gonna,
way.
I'm not gonna be calmed by this. But you know, there is that sense of when people are doing something all together, there's a kind of mimicry
Mm-hmm.
type of reality that does play there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one side of it. And I know that, you know, in terms of, say, if somebody was to speak in tongues, is it wrong that they mimic to learn how to do that?
No, maybe not, because
I'm throwing it out there. I know you got a twisted look on your face, Jonathan, going, oh, I don't
I
know
didn't know.
about that.
I don't know. It's a good question. It's a good question.
because it's
You
like,
know,
how do
I
you
mean,
learn how do you pray? How do you learn how to pray?
yeah, well, that's right.
You know?
I mean, I was reading a book last night. I had put it down and I found it. And I thought, oh, I must keep reading that. And it is on this subject. And he tells the story, which sort of got me hooked into it, because then I thought, oh, well, this is interesting. But he talks about Steve Jobs,
Oh yeah.
selling his typewriter. And so he's at this particular university and he sells his typewriter to this guy called Robert Frederick or something like that, about 4 years older than him. And I don't know whether the guy became famous, but anyway, he took it to his room and knocked on the door and nobody answered the door. And he thought, oh, I don't want to take it all the way back. I'll just go in the room. So he walks in the room. He says the guy's having sex with a woman. But his point was that
It's our most popular podcast now.
yeah. But what got my attention was that actually Jobs became a friend of his, but modeled to him this sort of peculiar behavior, sort of not extraordinary behavior, but sort of uncultured, sort of like, why would you do that sort of stuff? And I never knew this about Jobs, but he used to wash his feet in the toilet, you know. But this sort of extravagant sort of, but my point here is he was making was that the power of mimicry,
Right.
that somehow Jobs had actually been influenced by him by mimicking the same sort of behavior.
Okay.
And I just thought, oh, that's, you know, I think that's the story sort of caught my attention because I was sort of interested, where's this going?
Yeah.
But I thought, well, that's interesting, isn't it? You know, so he wasn't like that, and then he becomes a sort of, you know, I mean, I don't know what Jobs' moral life was like. I have no idea. Just don't know enough about the guy. But he, according to the writer of this book, he had some very peculiar behaviors.
Mm.
So they were learnt behaviors.
Right.
So mimicry is one end of it. When you were going to say, what's the other end of it then, Graham?
Well, there is a sense in which God works.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I've had sort of, I mean, I've had those moments. I remember there was a pretty low moment in my Christian walk where I'd been pretty hurt by being prophesied over in a public place, and it was pretty horrible, pretty demeaning. And I was really nursing my wounds. And I was at home at this particular moment watching.
Well, that sounds intense, man.
Watching TV, and I happened to turn on to Shine TV, but it was more me turning it on to be scathing and critical.
Yeah.
And what I was watching was Hillsong. And in this massive crowd, this guy was teaching from Isaiah, and it was just bollocks. And I was sitting there going, this is so wrong. You know, how can people put up with this kind of stuff?
Right.
And it was in that moment that I felt God come to me and say, it's okay. And I let it go. Sort of, it was a moment of grace, really, where it wasn't, well, it was basically I felt, there was no audible voice. It was just this feeling of like, Graham, it's okay. You're all right. You know, you don't have to fix it. It just is. And my grace extends beyond that. And the reason I know it was God, because I did let it go. It was sort of like a healing thing. Now, I'm using that story to say there are moments where we're surprised where God comes to us.
Yeah.
Where we're kind of, you know, super, you know, critical mind, and we're going, that's wrong, you know, and you kind of, we're angry, you know, or we're against something. there are moments where I think God just can break in ways that surprise us. And that'd be one experience that I've had where we're quite deeply cynical, angry, quite down, but then also at the same time, in the midst of being that, something happens. And somehow you let it go and you feel the spirit. And you know it's a spirit because it's not it's not condemning, it's actually bringing peace. I don't know what you think to that, but
yeah, man, it's such a tough one. Coming back to the tongues and the pastors encouraging people just to kind of follow what they're doing and, you know, speak in tongues as well. I've always, now you guys can correct my theology, but if tongues happens, I've always thought that is the Spirit welling up within inside of us and expressing the Spirit expressing himself through us, and that comes out in tongues that we don't understand. So it's the Spirit coming upon us that leads us into speaking in tongues. Now, if that is the case, then copying somebody is false, because the Spirit hasn't come upon you to speak in that way. You're simply following a person. You're following behind someone. The Spirit is not on you. The Spirit is not leading you to speak in tongues, and it will not come upon you just because you're following someone else garbling noises. And to me, if you ask someone to do that, just copy me, just copy the tongues that I'm speaking, that is for your benefit only and not for the benefit of God. That would be my criticism of the pastor asking people to follow them in tongues.
Which I don't think in this context, they weren't doing that explicitly. It was just an encouragement to open your mouth and just begin to actually use your tongue.
Yeah,
but it's like you got to loosen it up.
Nah, the Spirit loosens the tongue to pray to God. You don't loosen your tongue to pray to God, especially around tongues. It's a spiritual gift.
Yeah, I mean
that would be my harsh criticism of that. I think it's more edifying for people around you and the pastor maybe. I don't know.
It's interesting, different denominations. So the denomination I belong to, Elam, which is a United Kingdom, sort of where it comes. That's sort of where it comes. It's life.
Okay.
And then you have Assemblies of God, which is North American. It's in England. But interesting, the doctrine of speaking in tongues is quite different between those denominations.
Yeah, lay it on us, mate.
God is that to be, quote, baptized in the Holy Spirit. That's an in-house term describing the fullness of the Spirit that Pentecostals will use. The evidence of that for Assemblies of God is speaking in tongues, and they will make quite a strong doctrine of that.
Okay.
In Elam denomination, it is not. It is one manifestation, but it's not required. A person to be filled with the Spirit, it could be any. I mean, any of the gifts, I suppose, but then I would even question that. I go, well, actually, evidence of the Spirit would be much more around Galatians 5 for me.
yeah, that's right.
Oh,
Which is
the fruit of the Spirit. So,
fruit of the Spirit. That's more Wesleyan.
Well, might be a bit of Wesleyan there. So, I mean, this varies across the Pentecostal continuum of different denominations.
Right.
So some will want to stress that much more because, I tend to think that speaking in tongues is where we have a language, and it's more of a private prayer.
Yep, that too, right? Yeah,
that's kind of where I would sit. But you get in pretty Pentecostal churches. I know the one I was growing up in. It used to really annoy me. I was in the music team, and so we go to have pre-prayer before we had the worship service, and it was all just speaking in tongues. And I used to go, but this is just nonsense, because I go, I can't. I'm not inspired by somebody gabbling away here.
Yeah.
But that was sort of, that becomes a kind of cultural sort of Pentecostal thing to do. That's what I imagine. That's what it was. It hadn't really been thought about. It was just, that's what you do.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Go.
Yeah. So when I was listening, I guess we're going to get into some theology on on what it means to be baptized in the Holy Spirit, I guess. Like a Wesleyan understanding of baptism in the Holy Spirit is like a second blessing of like what they would consider entire sanctification or being perfected in love as like that experience. Whereas Pentecostals see it as, oh, the second, like another baptism in the Holy Spirit, like the second blessing is, well, speaking in tongues. At least that's, I know you're like, yeah, Jonathan, you're like, what is all this?
I'm like, what's the second blessing stuff?
Yeah, I'm not even sure where I land on this whole second blessing thing, to be completely honest.
Where
But
is
what I
that?
would
Where is that
definitely,
biblically? Where do you find that?
Well, I think Pentecostals see the Luke Acts narrative as kind of a linear thing. So what you'll find often in the theology of Pentecostals, they live on one side of the cross, which is basically the Acts side.
Right.
And that's why it tends to be triumphalist.
Interesting.
Because the Spirit's come, and it's come in all its fullness.
Right.
And so when they would look at the Luke Acts, they'd also see as a linear historical line that, the Acts chapter 2 is the coming fullness of the Spirit.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a subsequent reality to actually regeneration. Now, my own personal position, I'd probably take a much more modified view than that. I don't, I think when you do your exegesis on the passage, it's hard to actually stay in that space.
Okay. Wow. Okay. That's cool. Interesting.
But that's very interesting when you see what you see in Pentecostal churches. If you wonder why the triumphalism, it's because they're tending to live on one side of the cross. The Luke Acts narrative.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, man. Yeah.
So what you mentioned, Graham, around like you like to live in Galatians 5 around the fruit of the Spirit. Like that's very much like a Wesleyan thing of like, yeah, the Spirit fills you up to primarily live a more surrendered and holy life before God. And to live more like you always were meant to live is that. But what I find fascinating is within my tradition in the East Coast of Canada in the Wesleyan Church is both of those moments can be received in a moment historically. I don't know how much I believe that at the moment.
All right.
But like for Pentecostals, it's like, well, come to the front, we'll pray for you, and you'll get the gift of speaking in tongues. And then for, Wesleyans back in like the early 20th century, it was, come to the front at the altar, surrender your life down afresh, even though you are a Christian, and we'll pray and receive like this experience of like no longer willfully sinning.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things with Pentecostals is the emphasis of the Spirit empowerment is one that's primary, and I think it's a really good thing for Pentecostals. I think it's one of the things that I'd want to fly as a flag, that the fullness of the Spirit is empowerment for mission.
Right. Okay.
So, to be filled with the Spirit is not just, this is where I'd make the distinction between charismatic and Pentecostal. Because charismatic, filled with the Spirit, I got these gifts. Pentecostals would go full of the Spirit for mission. Powered for mission. God's calling to mission.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's got this nuance, which I think's, and you'll see that sort of as it's sitting in there, that this drive for mission. Of course, it has its own inherent problems too, because we won't need to go there, but mission can end up becoming the words like relevant and contemporary become sort of key words, which you end up getting kind of syncretism. But this idea that mission, that the Spirit coming on you is to go out, and I think you do see that in Acts.
Yeah,
it's going
for sure. Well, the whole book of Acts, you could say, is the Acts of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Spirit's probably more appropriate title.
Yeah, Spirit's running ahead of them, and theology's trying to catch up all the way through.
Yeah. And I think we would all say that, you can do nothing without the Spirit. If the Spirit is not enlivening you, drawing you into the life of God, drawing you into situations where God is needed, then simply, whatever you're doing is not going to be of God, and it's going to end up kind of drying out. So the Spirit is kind of like that lubricant that's constantly moving us outwards into the world. I think we'd all say that. But the thing is, my thing is, it's the it's that filling up. It seems like the Pentecostals, maybe charismatics, it's that there seems to always be a depletion, and then we have to come back and get filled up again, and then the depletion, and then we have to come back and get filled up. And we only know that we're filled with the Spirit if we have these weekly moments of rapture or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas I would say that the Spirit is a constant. It's a constant, and it's not so much a filling up, it's a deepening of your understanding that the Spirit is always with you, always there to give you that strength. I don't know.
I think it's about being filled, being filled. It's an ongoing, continuous.
Yeah,
I think the problem is that with Pentecostals, what we do is we make it an event.
Yes, that's right.
And so therefore, and then that rolls into kind of, well, then who kind of administers the power?
Yeah.
And that's where you get into this sort of very quasi sort of apostolic thing of the man of God at the front, who somehow is administering sort of apostolic power that will give you a bit more stuff.
Yeah.
And I go, I have a problem with that. But that's kind of where that goes.
With a magic suit jacket.
Yep.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to name people, but you see this sort of, and I think it's related to the way in which they're seeing kind of the whole sort of apostolic thing.
Yes.
Which relates to hierarchy and power and the way in which the way they're seeing the church.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So, the sort of the man of God administers. He's the one that often it's a he, not a woman.
Yeah.
Is distributing, the hand on and,
Yeah.
It's not to say that I mean, God works despite. This is the part that just doesn't. All our theology, I go. That's why I go. The time I was sitting there watching the Hillsong, I'm going, this is all wrong.
Yeah.
And what I realize is actually God's still working in the midst of this. So
I know. I tell you. I mean,
if I was God, I wouldn't let it work, but God does.
Exactly.
He allows it.
Why is that the case? Because I'm thinking here. I've got a story. I went to a Bill Sabritsky summer camp when I was younger.
Can you provide some context to? I have no clue what you just
said. Greame will know what I'm talking about. So Bill Sabritsky, I mean, Graham's going to know more than I do about this guy. He's maybe he's dead now, so I shouldn't speak badly of the dead, but it was is he Pentecostal, charismatic? I'm not sure,
well,
but anyway,
he was Anglican. He was actually Anglican, but charismatic, but
really
into just to give some sort of context. I mean, I think in a way, a good man, but really in terms theologically, sort of really, I think, out of limb, casting out demons and
words of prophecy, specific words of prophecy to people.
You've got a spirit of this and a spirit of that. And, it just gets a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Oh, good on you, Jonathan. You must have enjoyed it.
No, I loved it, man. I loved it. So I was a teenager and I went to this, and I went and, they were having one of their big worship services and I was standing at the back as a teenager. Nothing was happening. I wasn't feeling anything. Similar thing to you, Joey. I wasn't feeling anything, man. And people going up the front and falling over and getting prayed for and all this. And a guy went up the front and a friend of mine said, hey, man, can you just come up and just pray with this guy too? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. And I went up the front. And as soon as I laid hands on him, I had one of those experiences, bang, out of the blue, man. Like I didn't go up the front for myself, not at all. I was like, I didn't even know what was going on. But I had an experience where I just felt like the Spirit of God just physically upon me. Crying, everything, like completely, out of control. And I had no idea what was going on. And it, I look back on it now. Did it change me? No, it didn't. I still went and did exactly all the other stuff I was doing as a teenager back in those days. But there was a weird imprint. All I can think of it now is like I had it imprinted me somehow that opened me for the rest of my life, that there was something more going on than just simply the material world, was that where I was just simply more than just living in a material world, that there were things at play in this world that are beyond my control and beyond my ken. And maybe that was the reason why I had that experience. I don't know. But it opened me to the possibility of there being more to life. Maybe that's what it's about. I don't know. Maybe that's what it was about for me. But God works in mysterious ways.
I mean, your experience is not unusual to people that I've heard similar stories.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But the trouble is that, you know,
how can you make a religion around that?
I don't know. That's the part.
How can you make that How can you make that a weekly thing? It is something particular and special, and between you and God. I just don't know how you can try and want that every week. I certainly wouldn't want it every week. Yeah, no, sorry, that's my experience.
Yeah, but that does happen too. But it's, you know, particularly if you sort of go to a church that's Pentecostal, that's quite revivalist.
Yeah,
they'll be looking for a revival each week. So
looking
for a revival each week means that you need to be topped up and filled afresh with the Spirit again.
Yeah,
that's not necessarily wrong, but it becomes, I think it has a really counter measure on our own formation, because we become disappointed because it never happens.
That's what I've seen too, or incredibly needy for that moment.
Yeah.
And to the detriment of all the other places where God is needing to work in your life. Sometimes the slow tilling of the soil that needs to happen. Just simply, you know, I don't know. I think there's other ways that the Spirit works, and I think we can focus on that one moment on Sunday morning. It's good, but there's so much more that needs to be happening in our lives to become whole and well and flourishing people.
Well, it puts the focus on then that everything the Spirit does is good. So what happens to the stuff that's bad in my life? Does that mean the Spirit's not at work?
Right.
Does that mean, and when we look at the narrative, you know, I mean, there's an interesting view to sort of push John's gospel in terms of the imagery that's used.
Mm-hmm.
The spear is put into Jesus' side.
Yeah.
Water comes out, you know.
Yeah.
That's imagery. Says something about the Spirit, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Spirit in the midst of pain. I would say, you know, well, yeah, I think you could develop kind of theological thought around that. Is that, and so the idea that, okay, if life's not good for me, then God's not there.
Yeah.
You know, if you do the maths, that's what it ends up being. So, but I think, well, actually, probably the formative parts of our lives are probably the difficult parts of our lives.
Yeah, but also I feel like
That's great.
when you have, I like what you said, Jonathan, where it's like, I don't know if I'd want that every week.
Mm.
People are probably listening like, what? Why wouldn't you want that every week?
Right.
And maybe it's because it's like, well, you said, hey, I had that experience, but I went back doing the foolish teenage things I was doing at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, clearly those are important moments and imprinting type moments, but there's other moments that are just as important. But also it makes it formulaic. Like if you're chasing after that moment,
yes, that's right.
You know, oh well, that moment happened under these conditions, and they seem to typically happen under these conditions.
Yeah,
and that inadvertently, or maybe more explicitly, creates the contemporary order of service, where it's like, all right, we'll do some fast songs at the beginning, slow songs leading up to the message, a song after the message with a response, powerful prayer, and then a happy song at the end to send everybody out on mission.
Yeah.
And
that's
it's like,
right.
because last time we did that at this event, that this awesome thing happened, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that it's not good. It's not a bad thing to have an order of service and to do the same thing every week. Like, that's fine. We all do.
Not
We
at
all
all.
churches that do the same thing every week.
Yeah.
But like, to what end? Are you trying to chase after a moment? And then I think what you get is you get people who, after they say, oh, how was Sunday? Oh, it wasn't that good, or oh, it wasn't the same as the Sunday before. And then you might not be critical, and you might be like, oh, really? But if you asked why, really you get down to it, it's because, oh, I didn't feel like God was there like he had been in the past.
Yeah.
You know? If I'm basing everything off of that one moment and that one experience.
That's great. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you shouldn't be like open to those moments or anything. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't engage in worship, and you shouldn't maybe raise your hands and in worship and prayer and whatever, shouldn't be like respond in some way to the message if that's your tradition.
Yep.
But it's like, are you chasing the moment, or and is your Christian theology only allowing you to see that God meets you in these moments?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't
I
know.
mean,
This is
that's an interesting thing about. I mean, I think about
good.
if you're living from week to week, you're living from event to event, you're living from moment to moment. The problem with that is there's no narrative.
Yeah.
Other than the narrative, oh, I had that last week. I hope I get this week.
Yeah.
So everything in between, God's only there on a Sunday.
It's so right.
And then I think that's just, so if I mean, then I think this rolls into the way in which you create the electric moment.
Yeah.
And it's such a, the bells and whistles are so great, so sensitizing, so kind of captivating that we get confused and thinking that's the moment that God turned up.
Yeah.
And that becomes an enclosed space.
Yeah.
Where everything out of that becomes another world. And so I think what happens is congregations can lose their narrative history, because they're not discerning where God is at work in the world. It's just making that Sunday that moment where people somehow get the vote of saying it's really good. I mean, that's a bit cynical, but having an experience.
Yeah.
And I think I don't think that's really necessarily life-changing. Yet in saying that, people can come into those moments and be life-changing, have quite an experience of God.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm saying this being like, I had a moment 2 Sundays ago.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I want, and I didn't really expect it to happen like that. I was expecting it to happen in my time of prayer when I went up to the front. But it didn't happen. Like nothing happened then, It happened when I was at my seat and I was critical.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like, it just blew my mind. I was like, what the heck? All right, so maybe it's not dependent on like my expectation all the time.
Yeah.
But I told this story to someone at church who is probably going to listen to this episode, and we had a good conversation, and they said, well, Joey, I just go back to that scripture where it says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am also in their midst. Because we were talking about like the formula of Sunday morning and gathering together, and where it seems like all the stuff happens when we're gathered. And yeah, he was like, no, like something happens because Jesus promised that he's there when there's people gathered there in his name. And when, and it's not to say obviously on an ontological level, Jonathan, that God isn't present other places and all the time. But there's like, one of my lecturers back in the uni days, I was having a nice meeting with him over at Tim Hortons in Canada, and
shout out
Tim Hortons, and he said, well, Joe, we know that God's present. We know that he's always here. He's omnipresent, but he's more present in some moments and sometimes. He's like, that's why the church has sacraments.
Right.
Because they believe that God is more present in these specific moments. For the Catholic Church, there's quite a few. He said, but at the very least, we can all agree, baptism and the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
He's more present. And then if you want to say the sacrament of fellowship, 2 or 3 are gathered, he said, I'm going to be there. So can we say that's a sacrament?
I think that's a good point. When there's something, not all the time, but there's something when Christians gather together and sing a worship song and pray, break bread. I mean, breaking bread is a sacrament, but there is that moment of being together. That I guess that's why don't forsake the assembling together, as the Hebrew writer would say.
There's
something about our faith is, I don't know what's the word. It's energized, inspired. It helps us imagine. So,
there's one, like, if I go back to like that question that people usually ask you when you say, "Oh, I went to church this morning," and they say, "Hey, was it good?" and you say, "Yeah" or "No" or whatever. And usually, I would say yes if, like, at the very least, if I had like a genuine connection with somebody that Sunday, at least now where I'm at now, and like I like you might not know this about me. I like hugs.
I did not know that.
No, I refrain from giving them liberally because I'm a 6'1" male, and that could be perceived as weird from time to time. Um, but yeah. So I'm like, if I have like a genuine connection with somebody, or like, I like, there's genuine love in a conversation, I'm like, wow, that was a good Sunday.
Yeah,
Um, and and then sometimes it's like, well, I was really engaged in what was happening today. That's, that was a good gathering.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I don't know. Like I base it less on like those whether I felt like God was there like he had in those handful of moments in the past.
yeah.
It's a bit more like, yeah, I don't know. It's a bit exactly what I just
You know what I
described.
find really interesting here, just thinking about object subject,
Yeah,
how subject orientated we
we
tend to
are.
be. Because
Mhm.
as a service good, yes, we broke bread together. We did these things together. Or is
Yeah,
it good because I felt a connection? It's just the subject
Yeah.
object thing playing in again of how we actually tend to bend one way more than the other
yeah,
in a in
yeah,
a uh, in a Protestant thing. Well, in a charismatic Pentecostal, probably even evangelical to some extent.
And if
mhm.
you're a Catholic and someone asks you was Sunday good, they're like, yeah, Sunday's always good. Mass is always good.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
have
yeah,
the
yeah,
Lord's,
Yeah,
we have the Eucharist.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
always good.
yeah.
Like
yeah.
it doesn't matter if I think it's good. It's good.
So, hey, coming back to I'm just thinking about your friend's comment of when two or more of people are gathered in my name, there I am also,
Yeah.
and thinking about coupling that with the experience of the Holy Spirit. So, so just drawing attention to what we're doing here. There's three of us here. So by that reasoning, God must be here with us,
Yeah, but we're on
right?
Zoom,
So
so it doesn't count.
yeah, yeah, that's right. But it's a virtual gathering, but like, and also the people that are listening right now, they're gathered with us. Who knows how many people? So more than three. So by that reckoning, Christ is here with us now. Now, none of us are having an outward experience of the Spirit. None of us are falling down. None of us are speaking in tongues. None of us are shaking. Yet, the Spirit is at work amongst us. Now, I think that's super, super important to just realize that
Mm.
when the Spirit is with you, it is not always falling down. It is not always shaking, but you can be sure that the Spirit is here now with us. The question then is, I think, are you listening?
Mm.
And I think those moments on Sunday morning are moments of grace where God says, dude, I'm here. I'm here, but I'm here all the time. You don't need to have this experience all the time. It's a grace, it's a gift, but go out with me always. I mean, surely that's the Christian life,
Mm.
to be constantly filled with the Spirit.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to look like fireworks. I think
Yeah,
that's the
I think you're right.
chasing of it's the chasing of an idol. The
Well,
spiritual life is a deepening, it's a turning of the ground, it's an awakening, it's an opening our eyes to the Spirit always with us.
mm-hmm.
I mean, the Spirit was sent out on Pentecost, right? I
Yep.
don't see it ever being taken back.
Now,
It's all the Spirit is always with us.
so here's an addition onto what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, go
So
for it.
here's application, then maybe not.
Yeah,
We're obviously this isn't exclusively the only application I'm giving, or have given. But have you ever had this experience? Maybe you guys haven't, because we work in churches or in Christian organizations for the most part.
yep, yep,
But when you are in like a secular work environment and then you
yeah,
realize that one of your colleagues is a Christian,
yeah, yeah,
and then you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone.
right,
And
yeah,
then you like, oh, there's a third one. And
yeah,
maybe like an office of like 50 people or something. And I'm like, okay, so two or three are gathered in my name.
yeah,
Like, what kind of gathering does it need to be? Is there a formula? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, great question.
But
Exactly.
like, he's gonna meet with you there, and he's actually in your workspace right now.
Yeah, that's right.
Obviously, God's Spirit is with you because you're filled with the Spirit. But if we
Yep.
actually take that scripture literally and say, hey, if there's more than just one of you in a space, then something's going to be different in the space.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Joey, I love that. And I would agree with that 100%.
Insert school, you know?
I was just thinking about this, just taking it off on another tangent.
Yeah, good.
If we think about those three people in the same space, you're not necessarily doing anything, having any pre-meeting or anything to know that we are two or three gathering in a similar space or in a workspace.
Yeah.
So what's the connecting part here? So I would like to use the word sort of resonance around the notion of relationship.
Yep.
It's a spirit working within that resonance of the relationship.
Yep.
That's I think using that language gives us a little bit more room to move, is to say, because otherwise we get trapped into manifestation.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, so where's the manifestation of the spirit? Oh, we did this.
That's exactly right.
But the problem is that we can't see relationships necessarily.
Yeah.
We, like our eyes want to. When we think about manifestation, we're usually thinking about our optical sense.
Yep.
I saw this.
Yep.
I saw gold dust, or I saw, but when we speak about relationship, we can't necessarily, we feel it.
Yeah.
Or using an acoustic metaphor, there's a resonance of something, a resonance of generosity.
Yeah.
A resonance of hospitality.
Yep.
A resonance of, there's something that's tangible, but we can't really see it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And taking both those, the workplace and also what you're saying about those resonances, I've seen this happen on the sideline of my kids' soccer game, where sometimes when it's just me, there's other parents that are not Christian. The temperature of that sideline can be very competitive and very kind of not friendly, like, go on, get the kids and win this game and stuff like that. And then, when some other parents turn up that I know are Christian, and we start because we're Christian, we're encouraging the kids. We're saying it's okay, you're doing your best, all that kind of stuff. The temperature changes. So in many ways, the Spirit's at work. We're changing the temperature of that situation. We're kind of almost letting the Spirit speak in that situation. Are we manifesting the Spirit in any kind of way? No, but we're opening a new world. We're showing a different way that you can be in this world, where it doesn't have to be about competitiveness. It can be about inclusivity, where everyone's okay to be in that space. I just see that as a practical outworking of the Spirit at work.
I really like that. I really like that illustration.
Yeah.
There's been a bit of talk sometimes when I'm driving around, talk about conversations about, parents getting overexcited on the sideline and becoming like bullies.
Yeah.
And yet
it's terrible.
And that idea that somehow, and I really like the word that you're using there, that when we're gathering together, there's a making that's changing the space.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. And I think that temperature, it's very hard to put language to this, but that temperature is the Spirit. The Spirit drawing, encasing people in the love of God. And that's what the Spirit does. The Spirit is the love between the Father and the Son who draws us into that love. So, yeah.
No, that's good. I got some context for that passage in Matthew 18:12.
Yeah.
So Paul's not Paul. I always say Paul because I talk a lot about Paul. Jesus says it's how to deal with like someone who's in sin in the church.
Right.
And it's like, I'll go to them in quiet. Oh, if they won't listen, bring someone else in. Oh, if they won't listen, bring them before like the elders. If they won't listen, then just they got to be out because they don't want reconciliation, essentially, right?
Yeah, right.
And then he says, I truly tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever is you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I tell you that if two of you agree on earth about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For when two or three are gathered in my name, there I am with them. So the context is interesting.
Yeah.
Context is speaking about like church discipline broadly, and about forgiveness and about reconciliation, but also about like when the church is in agreement, God's like, okay, let's go for it.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, but to say that, and Jesus is affirming, hey, I'm with you in these kind of difficult moments as well. So the question is that does the context make it only exclusive to this context, or does the two or three gathered in my name to kind of transcend that one specific context, and is it like a principle for like all time?
Personally, I think it transcends. I think it transcends that moment. To me, that speaks of the agreement between people listening to the Spirit together. And if all can agree that they are feeling the same thing or understood the situation in the same way, that is the Spirit speaking to them all. If one person just agrees in the situation and another person sees it completely different, then there's not that agreement of spirits. So you almost need a cohort of people to all be listening to the Spirit together and to say, yes, I believe this is what the Spirit is saying to us. We can move forward in this. And we see this through church history. This is what the councils did. One person didn't decide on doctrine. We needed a cohort of people to all be listening to the Spirit, to all to agree. And then we can be sure that the Spirit is speaking to us as a group, as the church. So that's what the councils did, and I think it happens on a smaller scale as well, when two or more are gathered.
So to confirm that, the story I think of is in Acts 13 when Paul and Barnabas are sent up by the church in Antioch in Syria. And it says, now in the church in Antioch there are prophets and teachers, and these were Barnabas, Simeon, Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, and Saul or Paul. They were worshiping the Lord and fasting. So they were worshiping and not eating. And the Holy Spirit said, set apart from me Barnabas and Saul for the work which I've called them. So after they had fasted and prayed, they placed their hands on them and sent them out.
Yeah.
So that seems like a pretty similar moment where it's like, all right, people are gathered. They're gathered for a purpose, for a reason. There's discernment's happening. God's there and he speaks.
Yeah.
And then they all discern that, yeah, this is a good thing.
Yeah.
And Paul and Barnabas are like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a really interesting thing here about, well, I'm reminded of some sort of like what I call sort of communication theory.
Okay.
Of if you've got a circle, you draw a circle and you put yourself in the middle of the circle and you're the one that's directing all the traffic. And then if you see the circle with people sitting out on the edge of the circle, all trying to talk to each other, getting their point across. But there's another dimension where there's no circle, or the lines is just sort of, it's a permeable line.
Yeah.
That what's happening there is that the idea is passing through everybody.
Yeah.
There's a sense of, a person like Senge talks about this. I mean, they're not coming from a Christian perspective or from a Buddhist perspective.
Right.
But I think some of the theory is helpful in the sense of presencing, they call it, where you're in a sort of an eldership team, and it's like we're not taking a vote here. We're kind of and everybody seems to get on the right page.
Yeah,
it seemed to be us, and it's like the only way you can say it seemed to be us and seemed to be good to us in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
yeah. So it's I mean, so
that's right.
So I think that's what's going on in with Paul. It's like, this wasn't my good idea.
Yeah,
we talked about it, we thrashed it out, but it's gone well beyond my idea, because it's not my idea, but it's something's happened where it's permeated with each other to come to something that seems to us to be right.
Yes.
Yeah, and you would need a massive amount of discernment in that. So even within this passage, this is where the biblical studies side of me is coming out. Paul, he had been traveling regionally within Antioch and
Mm-hmm.
maybe Tarsus and
Mm-hmm.
down to Jerusalem, and then some say he went around Mount Sinai as well in that period of time for about a decade or so, like a while. And he always knew he'd be a missionary to the Gentiles throughout that whole period of time. So it says that the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." So it was like everybody
Mm.
knew that this was going to happen, that Paul was going to be a missionary to Gentiles, but the question was when,
Right.
right? And that's where the discernment of the church happened, where it's like, yeah, now's the time.
Yep.
Go now.
Yep.
And it was when they were gathered together, the two or more, gathered together,
Yeah.
that discernment was made realized. You think Paul maybe by himself, sleeping, he's like, I could go tomorrow.
Yeah.
Why not?
Exactly. Exactly.
I'm chomping at the bit right now. It's been 10 years. I think I'm ready.
Yeah.
And then now the church sent him out and confirmed that call collectively together.
Yeah. And there's power in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of, I mean, presses these practices, doesn't it? The notion of communication, but it's not just communication. It's this listening, deep listening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of listening that's it's not just an ear listening.
No.
It's a sensory, the sensorium is all listening.
That's right.
There's a
That's right.
there's the old word for common sense is called sensus commodus. The idea in popular culture, common sense is, oh, well, that just makes sense.
Yeah.
But the idea of sensus commodus or common sense was all the senses coming together.
Mm.
All ears, taste, sight, feel, smell, all those senses coming together. Aha.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether that's just, whether that's something to do with the deep listening.
Yeah, I think that's great.
There's a deep common sense. This seems right. It's common to all our senses.
That's great.
Correct me if I'm wrong, if I told this story or not, but when I was at uni, we had like what we call like a spiritual emphasis week. So we have like an evening chapel, like a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday or something, right? For the week, which is abnormal. We don't chapel that often in the week, and certainly not in the evenings. And leading up to and during that week, we had like people do like a sign up for a prayer slot of 24-hour prayer. From Monday to Friday. And so 24 hours, 24 people, 5 days of the week. And so people signed up. We had it filled up pretty well. And then, but I was thinking throughout this, I'm like, well, why are we only praying for these types of moments? Like, why, like, it seems like it's very selective. Why don't we pray for like, why isn't this longer? Like, are we favoring this moment above like everyday life or something? And I thought I was the only one thinking that. And then I think it was the Thursday, the last night, the person who was the guest preacher or whatever for the week, he said, well, I know you're doing this prayer thing, but he's like, I feel like God's asking me to tell you that this doesn't just need to be for this week.
Yeah.
And then like people started weeping in the crowd because we all had the same thought, but no one had verbalized it yet. Yeah. And then for that entire semester up until Christmas, we did the 20 every single day, and what we did was had this big meeting on like the Friday of that week. We had all these slots, and basically you picked an hour. Some people picked that same hour every single day. Some people picked that hour once a week. But you picked an hour, and that was your prayer time. And but it was a collective, almost like you're like it was common, if you will, Graham. It was common sense that was the thing, but it was like the Spirit was speaking in that common sense moment.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think that's right. Yeah. If we were gonna, if I was gonna sum up what I would get out of this talk, just getting out of this talk would be to say, don't discount the extraordinary experiences of the Spirit, because I think that can certainly happen, but broaden the understanding of that the Spirit is always at work, and work in kind of maybe unseen and quieter ways as well that don't discount those moments either. That would be what I would say.
No, that's good.
Nice summary, Jonathan.
Yeah.
If I had to add a caveat, because we talked about it,
Yeah.
and don't try and do that by yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Basically, what Jesus is saying, this life is not to be lived alone. And I'm with you if there's more than just you. I'm with you if there's just you, but I'm really with you if there's more than just you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.